After the foster system failed me, I went to the address on my birth certificate. What I found changed everything. If you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, a name on a piece of paper with no story attached, then you need to hear this. Hit that subscribe button because we're building a community for people whose stories deserve to be told. The day I turned 18 wasn't a celebration. There was no cake, no off-key singing, no pile of brightly wrapped presents. There was just a cardboard box, a manila envelope, and the tired, neutral expression of my caseworker, Mrs. Gable. She'd been my third caseworker in 4 years, and I doubt she could have picked me out of a lineup. To her, I was a file Usher 734, Leo Vance, and today my file was being closed. "So, that's it," she said, sliding the envelope across the dented metal desk. Her voice was flat, the sound of paperwork being processed. "You're officially an adult, Leo. Congratulations." The word felt like a joke. Congratulations on what? Surviving. On making it to the legal age of abandonment. I looked down at my hands, resting on my knees. They were trembling slightly. For years, 18 had been this mythical finish line. The day I'd be free. But sitting in that sterile office with the smell of floor wax and quiet desperation in the air, freedom felt a lot like being pushed off a cliff. Inside the box were the accumulated odds and ends of a life lived in transit. A few worn-out paperbacks, a faded hoodie from a school I'd only attended for 6 months, a small, carved wooden bird a foster dad had given me before he and his wife decided a teenager was too much work. It was a pathetic collection, the sum total of a childhood that didn't belong to me. The envelope was more important. It contained my final allowance from the state, a check for $250, and 2 documents, my Social Security card and my original birth certificate. I'd seen copies before, but never the real thing. It was on thick, cream-colored paper, the edges softened with age. I ran my thumb over the raised seal of the state, and there it was. My mother's name, Ilara Vance, a signature I didn't recognize, and below it, an address. Not a hospital, but a street address in a town I'd never heard of. 102 Black Creek Road, Havenwood. For my entire life, that address had been a ghost, a piece of data. My file said my mother had relinquished her rights due to instability. It was a clean, bureaucratic term for being unwanted. I'd spent countless nights in strange beds, staring at unfamiliar ceilings, wondering about her. I'd built her up in my mind into 100 different people. A tragic artist, a runaway teen, a woman broken by the world. But mostly, I imagined her as someone who hadn't wanted me. The anger from that was a cold, hard stone in my gut. "Any questions?" Mrs. Gable asked, already reaching for the next file on her stack. I looked up from the paper. "This address," I said, my voice hoarse. "Havenwood. Is there anything in the file about it?" She sighed, a little puff of impatience. She slid on her reading glasses and clicked through my digital record on her clunky monitor. Her eyes scanned the screen. "No. Just listed as place of birth. Your mother's last known residence. Probably a rental she left years ago. There's no record of any family connections there, Leo. The state has already checked." Her dismissal felt like a door slamming shut. But for the first time looking at that piece of paper, I felt something other than the hollow ache of being left behind. It was a flicker of something, not quite hope. More like resolve. The system was done with me. It had chewed me up and spit me out with $200 in a flimsy cardboard box. I had no one, no plan. I could go to a shelter in the city, try to get a job washing dishes and probably fail. Or I could take the one thread I had, this one tangible link to a past I never knew, and pull on it. I folded the birth certificate carefully and put it in my pocket. "No," I said, standing up. "No more questions." She gave me a brisk, professional nod. "Good luck, Leo." I didn't say thank you. The luck they'd given me had been all bad. I walked out of that office, carrying my life in a box, and I didn't look back. The air outside was cold, the sky a flat, unforgiving gray. I stood on the sidewalk, the city noise a chaotic roar around me. Other people had homes to go to, families waiting, futures mapped out. I had an address, a ghost of a place in a town I didn't know. It was next to nothing, but it was also everything. I walked to the bus station, the check in my pocket feeling like the price of a ticket to the only place in the world I might belong. The bus ride was a long, rumbling journey from the familiar gray of the city to a world that grew progressively greener and quieter. I watched the concrete sprawl give way to suburbs, then to small towns, and finally to wide-open stretches of farmland and dense forest. With every mile, the knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened. What was I doing? Mrs. Gable was right. It was probably just an empty lot now, or a rundown apartment with another family living inside. A family who would look at me with suspicion and pity when I tried to explain why I was standing on their doorstep. I spent the hours staring out the window, my reflection a pale, translucent face superimposed over the rolling hills. I thought about the other kids in the system. Some aged out and vanished, swallowed by the streets. Some found their way, against all odds, building lives from scratch. And some, like me, were haunted by the question mark of their origins. We were stories without a beginning. Maybe that's why I was on this bus? I wasn't looking for a mother who had thrown me away. I was just looking for page 1. My life in foster care had been a series of temporary spaces. A beige bedroom here, a cramped attic there. I'd learned to be small, to take up as little space as possible, to be agreeable, to be forgettable. It was a survival tactic. If they forgot you were there, they couldn't get angry at you. They couldn't get tired of you. They couldn't decide you were too much trouble. I had perfected the art of being invisible. But as the bus carried me further and further from everything I knew, I felt a strange, terrifying desire to be seen, to find a place where I didn't have to be a ghost. The bus driver, a burly man with a kind, tired face, called out, "Havenwood Crossroads, next and final stop." My heart hammered against my ribs. I was the only one left on the bus. I grabbed my box and my worn backpack and walked to the front. "You sure this is where you want to be, son?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "Ain't much out here but trees and old roads." "I'm sure," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He pulled over at a lonely intersection where two narrow country roads met. There was a rusted stop sign and a small, faded sign that read, "Havenwood, 5 miles." He opened the door, and the air that rushed in was different from the city's. It was clean and smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and something else. Something wild and old. "Black Creek Road is that way," he said, pointing down the less traveled of the two roads. "It's a long walk. Good luck to you." I stepped off the bus and onto the gravel shoulder. The bus pulled away with a hiss of its air brakes, leaving me in a profound and intimidating silence, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds and the whisper of the wind in the tall pines that lined the road. I was utterly alone. For a moment, panic seized me. I could turn back, hitch a ride back to the city, back to the familiar misery. But then I looked down the road. It was unpaved, disappearing into a tunnel of overarching trees. It looked like a path into a different world. My world, maybe. I adjusted the backpack on my shoulders, picked up my box, and started walking. The walk was longer than I expected. The box grew heavy in my arms, its cardboard edges digging into my skin. The silence of the countryside was unnerving at first. I was used to the constant hum of the city, the sirens, the traffic, the noise of other people living their lives all around me. Out here, the only sounds were my own footsteps on the gravel and the rustling of leaves. But slowly, the quiet began to feel less like emptiness and more like peace. The light, filtering through the canopy of leaves, dappled the road in shifting patterns of gold and green. It was beautiful, in a stark, lonely way. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A rusted, leaning mailbox almost hidden by overgrown bushes. The numbers were faded, but I could just make them out. 142. My breath caught in my throat. I followed a narrow, rutted driveway that curved away from the road, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. And then the trees opened up, and I saw the house. It was an old farmhouse, a 2-story wooden structure that had once been painted white, but was now a patchwork of peeling paint and weathered gray wood. The porch roof sagged on one side, and shutters hung crookedly from the windows. The lawn was a wild meadow of tall grass and wildflowers, and a massive, ancient oak tree stood sentinel beside it, its branches like gnarled arms reaching for the sky. To the side, there was a large barn, its red paint faded to a dull, rusty brown. It wasn't an empty lot. It wasn't a modern suburban home. It was a ruin, but it was a beautiful one. It looked asleep, waiting. My first thought was disappointment. It was abandoned. Of course it was. What had I expected? For my mother to be sitting on the porch swing, waiting for me after 18 years? The idea was absurd, but as I stood there, taking it all in, I felt something else. A strange sense of familiarity. A pull, deep in my gut, that I couldn't explain. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. I walked up the creaking wooden steps of the porch, my footsteps loud in the stillness. I tried the front door, locked. I peered through a grimy window into a dark living room, where furniture sat draped in white sheets, like pale ghosts in the gloom. It was a time capsule. My hope faltered. This was a dead end. A romantic, foolish dead end. I was about to turn and walk away, to head back to the road and stick out my thumb and just go somewhere, anywhere else. But then my eyes fell on a small, handmade birdhouse nailed to one of the porch posts. It was weathered and worn, but there was something about it that drew my attention. On a whim, I reached inside. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a single, old-fashioned brass key, heavy and ornate. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely fit it into the lock. But it slid in with a satisfying click. I turned it. The lock tumblers shifted with a rusty groan, and the door swung inward, opening into the cool, dusty darkness of the house. I stepped across the threshold, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air inside was thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and dried lavender. It smelled like memory. It smelled like secrets. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that I was meant to be here. This wasn't just a house. It was the start of my story. I set my box down just inside the door, its scraping sound echoing in the cavernous silence. For a long moment, I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. The house was perfectly preserved under its layer of dust. In the living room to my left, the shrouded furniture looked like a sleeping family of giants. A grand stone fireplace stood cold and silent against the far wall, a stack of logs resting patiently beside it. To my right, a staircase with a beautifully carved banister led to the upper floor. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of a life abruptly paused. A book left open on a small table, its pages yellowed. A teacup and saucer on the mantelpiece. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt like the owner had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. I walked deeper into the house, my fingers trailing through the thick dust on a wooden table. It felt sacrilegious to disturb the stillness, but I also felt an undeniable right to be here. This place was connected to me. I moved into the kitchen at the back of the house. It was a large, farmhouse-style room with a huge porcelain sink and a sturdy wooden table in the center. The light was better here, streaming through a wide window that looked out onto an overgrown backyard. And that's when I saw it. Sitting in the exact center of the table, untouched by the thickest layers of dust, was a single, sealed envelope. My name, Leo, was written on the front in elegant, looping cursive. The sight of it sent a jolt through me, a shock of adrenaline and fear. This wasn't just a forgotten house. Someone had known I was coming, or at least hoped I would. My breath hitched. With trembling hands, I picked up the envelope. The paper was thick and heavy. I turned it over. There was no wax seal, no stamp, just my name. I carefully tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper, folded in 3. The same handwriting covered the page. I unfolded it and began to read. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, it means you found your way home. I am so sorry. I know those words are not enough. They will never be enough to make up for the years you have spent without me, for the life you were forced to live. Please, do not believe for 1 second that I ever stopped loving you. Leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever done, the wound that is never closed. But I need you to understand. It was the only way to keep you safe. This house, this land, it is yours. It has been in our family for 5 generations. It is your birthright. I have done everything in my power to make sure it would be here for you when you turned 18. I put it in a trust, a legal fortress to protect it until you were a man and could claim it for yourself. I hope you can feel the love that lives in these walls. It is the same love I have carried for you every single day. But this letter is not the whole story. It is only the beginning. There are things you need to know, secrets I had to keep to protect you. The truth is hidden here, in this house. I left it for you, a trail of breadcrumbs for you to follow. I trust you will be strong enough and clever enough to find it. Your journey begins where mine did, in my old bedroom upstairs. Find the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Everything you need to start is inside. Be careful, my son. The world is not as simple as it seems. But know this. You are not a mistake. You are not unwanted. You are the best part of me, and you were loved more than you can possibly imagine. All my love, forever your mother, Ilara. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through the tears that filled my eyes. The stone of anger in my gut, the one I had carried for 18 years, didn't disappear, but it shifted. It was no longer a simple, solid weight of resentment. It was something more complex, cracked through with grief and a fragile, terrifying hope. Safe? What had she needed to keep me safe from? And what secrets were hidden in this silent, sleeping house? I folded the letter, my hands shaking, and tucked it into my pocket, next to my birth certificate. The 2 documents felt like 2 halves of a puzzle. One was the question, the other the beginning of an answer. Driven by a new and urgent purpose, I turned and went to the staircase. Each step groaned under my weight as I climbed, moving up into the shadows of the 2nd floor. A long hallway stretched before me, with several closed doors. I knew instinctively which one was hers. It was the one at the very end, the one with a sliver of late afternoon light shining from underneath. The room was just as she had left it. A large four-poster bed, unmade, the blankets thrown back as if she'd just climbed out of it. A vanity with dusty bottles of perfume. And there, at the foot of the bed, was the cedar chest. It was old and dark, bound with iron straps. It looked heavy, solid, a container for secrets. I knelt before it, my heart pounding. This was it, the first breadcrumb. I lifted the heavy lid. It wasn't locked. It opened with a soft sigh of cedar-scented air, releasing the smell of the past. Inside, nestled on a bed of folded linens, was not just the start of a story but the beginning of my entire life. The contents of the cedar chest were a jumble of a life I'd never known. On top lay a stack of photographs, tied with a faded blue ribbon. I carefully untied it and began to look through them. The first was a picture of a young woman with a radiant, unguarded smile and wild, dark hair. Hilara, my mother. She was standing on the porch of this very house, squinting into the sun. In another, she was holding a baby, wrapped in a thick blanket. Me. She was looking down at me with an expression of such fierce, overwhelming love that it made my chest ache. I saw myself as a toddler, taking wobbly steps in the tall grass of the yard, my mother's hands hovering just behind me, ready to catch me. There were pictures of her with an older man who had the same kind eyes, my grandfather, I presumed. They were working in the barn, laughing. It was a life I was meant to have, a life of warmth and connection, stolen from me before I could even form the memories. I had spent so long feeling like a blank slate, and here was the proof that I had a history, a lineage. I came from somewhere. I belonged to someone. Beneath the photos were more, letters bundled together. I set them aside for later, my hands drawn to a thick, legal-looking document. I unfolded it. It was the deed to the property. 142 Black Creek Road, Havenwood. 120 acres of land, the farmhouse, the barn, all of it. And at the bottom, the legal paperwork for a trust naming me, Leo Vance, as the sole beneficiary upon my 18th birthday. It was real. This was all mine. The weight of it was staggering. But there was something else in the chest, tucked into the corner, wrapped in a piece of velvet cloth. I unwrapped it to find a small, heavy, locked metal box. It was cold to the touch, and there was no keyhole, only a simple, 3-digit combination lock. It felt important, dangerous even. I turned my attention back to the letters. I chose one from the middle of the stack. The handwriting was the same as the first letter, but this one felt different. The loops were tighter, the words more rushed. Leo, if you've found the box, then you know this is more serious than just inheriting a piece of land. I need you to listen to me carefully. I didn't just have money problems, I was targeted. There's a company, a big development corporation out of the city called Vantage Corp. They want this land. They want all the land in this valley. They plan to build luxury resorts, a golf course, things for rich people who want to escape the city. They think history and heritage are just obstacles on a balance sheet. They came to me after your grandfather died. At first, they were polite. They made an offer, a low one. I refused. This land was his legacy, our home. But they didn't go away. They started buying up the neighboring farms, pressuring people, finding their debts, leveraging them until they had no choice but to sell for pennies on the dollar. When I still wouldn't sell, they changed their tactics. They got ugly. They found a loan my grandfather had taken out years ago, a private loan from an investor who, it turns out, was secretly working for them. They bought the debt. Suddenly, I owed them an impossible amount of money. They threatened foreclosure. They harassed me. Cars would park on the road outside the house at all hours. They were trying to break me, to scare me into signing the farm away. I was alone, and I was terrified, not for me, for you. You were only a baby. I overheard one of them talking one day. He said something like, "It'd be a shame if something happened to the kid, a single mother out here all alone, things happen." That was when I knew I couldn't win. Not by fighting them head on. They were a monster, and I was just one person. But I could protect you. I made the hardest choice of my life. I created the trust to shield the farm, making it legally untouchable until you were an adult. And then, I made you disappear. I took you to the city and put you into the system. I gave you up. It felt like tearing out my own heart. I told myself it was the only way they would stop looking for you, the only way you'd be safe from their reach. I walked away, and I never looked back, because looking back would have destroyed me. I don't know what has happened in the years since. I don't know if they are still waiting, still watching. But I have to believe that you are strong enough now to face them. That box holds the key. I pray you can figure it out. Be brave, my Leo. Ilara. I had to stop reading. The air in the room was suddenly too thin. I stumbled over to the window and pushed it open, gasping for fresh air. The story I had told myself my whole life, the story of a mother who didn't want me, was a lie. A complete and utter fabrication. She hadn't abandoned me. She had hidden me. She had sacrificed her own life, her home, her connection to me, all to protect me from some faceless corporate monster. The anger I'd held on to for so long dissolved, replaced by a wave of profound, gut-wrenching grief. I cried. I cried for the little boy who grew up feeling worthless, for the teenager who built walls of rage around his heart. I cried for her, for the impossible choice she had to make. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and wept until I was empty. It's a strange thing, having the entire foundation of your world crumble and reform in the space of a few minutes. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where a single truth is revealed, and suddenly everything you thought you knew about your life, about your past, about the people you loved or hated, it all changes. It's like being reborn, but with all the scars of your previous life still intact. It's painful, and it's terrifying, but it's also a chance to see things clearly for the first time. If you know that feeling, if you've ever had to rebuild your own story from the ground up, then stick with me. This community is for people who understand that the past is never really past, but it doesn't have to be a prison. Your story matters here. Now, let's get back to that locked metal box, because my mother was right. It held the key to everything. After the storm of grief passed, I was left with a cold, clear sense of purpose. My mother hadn't just left me a house, she'd left me a mission. And the next step was locked inside that metal box. I picked it up again. It felt heavier now, weighted with the truth of her sacrifice. The 3-digit combination lock seemed simple, but I knew it wouldn't be. It would be something personal, a number only she would think I could find. I looked at the last letter again. I pray you can figure it out. It was a test. A puzzle left for a son she never got to know, but who she believed in anyway. I tried the obvious combinations first. My birthday, the house number, nothing. I sat on the floor of her bedroom, the box in my lap, turning the smooth metal dials over and over. What date would be significant to her? What number would bind us together across 18 years of silence? My mind raced through the possibilities. I was looking for a secret, a piece of information that wasn't on any official document. I went back to the cedar chest, my fingers searching more carefully this time. I sifted through the linens, dug into the corners. And then I found it, tucked away at the very bottom. A small, worn, leather-bound book. A baby book. My baby book. My hands trembled as I opened it. On the first page, in her beautiful script, was my full name, Leo Arthur Vance, and below it, my birth date. But next to it, she had written something else. Expected, April 12th. Arrived, April 21st. Always had to do things his own way, my original due date, a date no one else would know, a date that was just between us. April 12th, 412. I picked up the box, my heart hammering. I turned the first dial to 4, the second to 1, the third to 2. I pulled on the latch. There was a loud, satisfying click. It opened. I lifted the lid. The inside of the box was packed to the brim with stacks of cash. $100 bills, $50 bills, all bound neatly with rubber bands. I had never seen so much money in my life. It had to be tens of thousands of dollars. I pulled out one of the stacks. Beneath it was another letter, on different paper this time. It was creased and worn, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. The writing was frantic, almost illegible in places. Leo, this is the last one. If you are reading this, I am probably gone. I don't know how much time I have. They are closing in. This money is everything I could save, everything I could hide. I sold my car, my grandfather's watch, anything of value they couldn't trace. It's not enough to make you rich, but it might be enough to give you a fighting chance. It is your armor. Use it wisely. Do not trust the local authorities. Vantage has people on their payroll. The town council, the sheriff's department, they are all compromised. There is only one person you can trust. His name is Aris Thorne. He's a lawyer in town, an old-school country lawyer. He was my father's best friend. He's stubborn and cynical, but he is a good man. He knows what Vantage is, and he hates them for what they've done to this valley. His office is on Main Street above the old hardware store. Show him this letter, say the name Black Creek. He will know. He will tell you what you are up against. He will tell you the risks. Listen to him. He will lay out your choices. You can take this money and disappear, run. Build a new life somewhere far away from here and never look back. No one would blame you. It is more than I had, and maybe it is the smartest thing to do. Or, you can stay. You can use this money to fight. You can try to save our home, to get justice for what they did to our family, to our neighbors. It is a dangerous choice. You could lose everything, the money, the farm, all of it. I cannot make that choice for you. I took away your choices once to keep you safe. Now, you are a man. This choice must be yours alone. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of the man I know you have become. You have our family's strength in you, Leo, the strength of the creek that carves the stone, of the oak that withstands the storm. Go see Aris. He will be your guide. I love you. Ilara. I closed the box, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. This wasn't just a story from the past. It was a present-day threat. Vantage Corp, they were still out there, and they still wanted this land. My mother had left me not just an inheritance, but a war, and a choice. Run or fight. The boy who had walked out of the group home that morning would have taken the money and run without a second thought. He was a survivor. He knew how to disappear. But I wasn't that boy anymore. In the space of a single afternoon, in this dusty, silent house, I had found a history. I had found a mother's love. I had found a home. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I couldn't walk away from it. Running was what I had done my whole life. This time, I would stand my ground. I packed the metal box into my backpack, along with the letters and the deed. The money felt like a dangerous weight on my back. I left my other belongings in the house, closed and locked the front door, and hid the key back in the birdhouse. I walked down the long driveway, my steps more certain now. I wasn't just a lost kid anymore, I was Leo Vance. And I was going to see a lawyer. The town of Havenwood was small, the kind of place where time seemed to move a little slower. Main Street was lined with two-story brick buildings, their facades faded from a century of sun and snow. There was a diner, a post office, a general store, and, just as the letter said, an old hardware store with a flight of wooden stairs on the side leading to a second-floor office. A simple, black and gold sign read, Heiress Thorne, Attorney at Law. I took a deep breath and climbed the stairs. They creaked under my feet, each step echoing the pounding of my heart. The office was one room, filled with towering shelves of law books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Dust motes danced in the single beam of afternoon sun slanting through the tall window. And behind a massive oak desk, piled high with precarious stacks of paper, sat a man who looked as old and weathered as the books around him. He had a shock of unruly white hair, a face etched with deep lines, and sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I suddenly felt very young and out of my depth. I'm looking for Mr. Heiress Thorne." "You found him," he said, not unkindly. "What's your trouble, son? Don't tell me you're the one who's been leaving tire tracks up on Miller's Ridge." "No, sir," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I walked closer to the desk. "My name is Leo Vance. My mother was Elara Vance." I paused, then added the words from the letter. Black Creek. The change in his expression was immediate and profound. The cynicism vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes as if he were trying to wipe away a ghost. He stared at me, his gaze intense, searching my face for a resemblance. "Elara's boy," he breathed, the words heavy with history. "My God, we all thought, everyone assumed you were—" He trailed off, shaking his head slowly. "Come in, sit down." He cleared a stack of books off a worn leather chair in front of his desk. I sat, placing my backpack carefully on the floor beside me. For a long moment he just looked at me, 100 emotions playing across his face. Shock, sadness, and something that looked like hope. "She did it," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "That brave, foolish woman, she actually did it." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "Tell me everything, son. Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about aging out of the system, about the birth certificate, the long bus ride. I told him about finding the house, the key, and the first letter. I pulled out the other letters and the deed and laid them on his desk. Finally, I unzipped my backpack and lifted out the metal box. I set it between us with a heavy thud. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine, nodding slowly as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the box. He reached out and touched it, his fingers tracing the metal edges. "I haven't heard from her in 18 years, he said quietly. "After she left, Vantage Corp tore this valley apart. They put a lien on her property for that phantom debt, but they couldn't foreclose because of the trust she'd set up. It was ironclad. They've been waiting, like vultures, waiting for her to be declared legally dead, or for the trust to expire. They send notices every year. In fact," he said, rummaging through a pile of papers, "the latest one arrived last week. They're petitioning the court to dissolve the trust and seize the property to satisfy the lien. The hearing is in 2 months." My blood ran cold. So they're still here. "They never left," Thorne confirmed, his voice grim. "They own half the county now, but your mother's farm, that's the crown jewel. It's the centerpiece of their whole development plan. They need it, and they will do anything to get it." He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. "Ilara was right. She left you a choice. A terrible, life-defining choice." He laid it out for me, the two paths branching before me. "Option 1, he said, ticking it off on his finger. "You take that money, you walk out of this office, and you vanish. I file some paperwork to delay their petition, give you a head start. They'll get the farm eventually, but you'll be long gone. You'll be safe. You can go to college, start a business, build a life. A clean slate." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. A clean slate was everything I had ever wanted. "Option 2, he continued, his voice lowering. "You stay, you fight. We use this money to hire experts, to challenge the legitimacy of the debt, to file a countersuit for harassment. We dig into Vantage's history, find the other families they've ruined. We turn over every rock. It will be a long, ugly, expensive battle. Their pockets are infinitely deeper than yours. The odds are stacked against us. We will probably lose. And if we lose, you walk away with nothing. Not the money, not the farm, nothing." He looked at me, his old eyes sharp and clear. "So, that's the choice, Leo, a guaranteed future somewhere else, or a sliver of a chance to save your home. What do you want to do?" There was no hesitation. The boy who survived by being invisible was gone. The man who sat in his place had a name, a history, and a home to defend. My mother had sacrificed everything for this land, for me. To run would be to dishonor that, to let her story end in defeat. "We fight," I said. The words came out stronger than I expected, filled with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "We fight them with everything we have." A slow smile spread across Eris Thorne's face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile, and it transformed his weary features. It was a smile of fierce, grudging respect. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Your grandfather would be proud. Your mother would be proud." He stood up and walked over to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick, dusty folder. "I've been waiting for this fight for a long time. Let's give those bastards hell." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Eris Thorne was a force of nature. He transformed from a sleepy country lawyer into a tenacious, sharp-witted strategist. My life, which had been defined by waiting and uncertainty, suddenly had a rigid structure. I spent my days at his office, sifting through mountains of legal documents, and my nights back at the farmhouse, which was slowly starting to feel less like a museum and more like a home. I started small. I cleaned. I swept away the thick layers of dust, washed the windows until the sunlight streamed in, and pulled the white sheets off the furniture, revealing sturdy, handcrafted wooden pieces that had stood the test of time. With every bit of grime I wiped away, I felt like I was clearing away the cobwebs in my own mind, letting in the light. I slept in my mother's old room, in her bed, feeling her presence not as a ghost, but as a source of strength. The farm itself became my sanctuary. Eris had warned me that Vantage would know I was there. He told me to be careful, to be aware of any strange cars or unfamiliar faces. The feeling of being watched was unsettling, but it was no longer the passive, helpless fear of a child. It was the vigilance of a defender. This was my land. They were the intruders. My mother's letters had mentioned that the truth was hidden in the house. I knew the letters in the chest were only the beginning. I started to search, methodically, room by room. But it was in the barn that I found her real fortress of secrets. The barn was huge, the air inside thick with the sweet smell of old hay and dry earth. The main floor was filled with rusted farm equipment, but a rickety ladder led up to a hayloft. And there, tucked away under a pile of old tarps, I found a heavy, locked trunk. This time, there was no combination. I had to pry it open with a crowbar. Inside was my mother's arsenal. It was filled with ledgers, notebooks, and dozens of old microcassettes. I found an old player in the trunk and put one in. The audio was crackly, but I could hear my mother's voice, steady and clear, speaking into the recorder. She had documented everything. Every threatening phone call, every visit from Vantage's representatives. She'd made notes on license plates, times, and dates. And then I heard the other voices. Men's voices. Smooth, professional, and dripping with menace. "You're all alone out here, Alara," one voice said, a voice that was falsely sympathetic. "This is a big place for a single mom. Let us help you. Sign the papers. Take the money. It's for the best." "My son and I will be fine," her voice replied, strong and defiant. "We'd hate for anything to complicate that," the man's voice answered, the threat hanging, unspoken, in the air. Listening to those tapes was like hearing a conversation from beyond the grave. I could feel her fear, but more than that, I could feel her courage. She had been fighting back, quietly, secretly, building a case against them. The notebooks were filled with her research. She had tracked Vantage's other acquisitions, making lists of the families who'd been forced out, noting the suspiciously low prices they'd been paid. She had been building a web, connecting the dots, creating a record of their predatory campaign. This was the evidence Aris needed. I brought the trunk to his office. He spent 2 days going through it, his excitement growing with every page he turned, every tape he listened to. "This is it, Leo," he said, his eyes gleaming. "This is the smoking gun. This isn't just a foreclosure case anymore. This is a pattern of racketeering, of predatory business practices. We can countersue, we can go on the offensive." He also encouraged me to connect with the community. "Your mother was building alliances," he said. "You need to do the same." It was the hardest part for me. I'd spent my life avoiding connection, but I took the lists my mother had made and started visiting the other farms in the valley. I introduced myself, explained who I was. At first, people were wary. They were beaten down, resigned. But when I told them about the evidence my mother had collected, when they saw that I was willing to fight, a spark of hope ignited in their eyes. An old farmer named Silas, whose family had lost their land for a fraction of its worth, shared his own stories of intimidation. A woman who ran the local diner, Maria, told me how Vantage had threatened to buy the building her business was in if she didn't stop speaking out against them. Slowly, a small network began to form. We met in the evenings at my farmhouse, huddled around the kitchen table, sharing stories, piecing together the full picture of Vantage's corruption. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. I wasn't just fighting for my farm. I was fighting for the soul of the whole valley. I was no longer Leo Vance, the foster kid. I was Alara's son, and I was a part of Havenwood. The lawsuit got ugly, just as Eris had predicted. Vantage's lawyers were slick and ruthless. They filed motion after motion, trying to drown us in paperwork and bleed my mother's savings dry. They tried to paint my mother as an unstable, paranoid woman who had abandoned her child. They tried to paint me as an opportunistic drifter, showing up to claim a property I had no right to. The pressure was immense. There were nights I lay awake, the weight of it all crushing me, convinced I was going to fail, that I would lose my home, my mother's money, and let down everyone who was counting on me. But then I would walk through the quiet rooms of the farmhouse or stand under the vast, star-filled sky outside, and I would feel my mother's strength. I would remember her voice on those tapes, defiant and strong. and I would remember the faces of my neighbors, their hope rekindled. And I knew I couldn't give up. The turning point came not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but in a quiet conference room. Eris had presented Vantage's legal team with our evidence, the tapes, the ledgers, the signed affidavits from a dozen other families. He laid out our case for a massive class-action lawsuit based on racketeering and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Their lawyers, who had been so arrogant and dismissive, suddenly went pale. They asked for a recess. An hour later, they came back with an offer. Aris laid it out for me back in his office. "They'll drop the lien on your property immediately," he said. "The farm is yours, free and clear. They are also offering a cash settlement for the harassment claims, a significant one. Enough to compensate the other families and set up a legal defense fund for the community. But there's a condition." "What is it?" I asked, my stomach in knots. "You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. All of you. You can never speak publicly about their methods. The evidence my mother collected gets buried. They walk away with their reputation intact, free to do this to another small town. It was the final test, the final choice. We could win our personal battle, but let the larger war continue. We could save our homes, but allow the monster to go find other prey. Or we could refuse the settlement, go to court, and risk everything for a chance at true justice, at public exposure. But that risk was enormous. We could lose, and everyone would be left with nothing. I thought about my mother. What would she have done? She had fought to protect me, her son. She had fought to save her home. This settlement achieved both of those things. It was a victory, even if it was an imperfect one. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about security. It was about giving this community the resources to protect itself in the future. "We take the deal," I said. "We take the win we can get, and we use it to make sure we're strong enough for the next fight." Eris nodded, a look of profound relief on his face. "That's a wise decision, Leo, not the one your grandfather would have made. He'd have burned it all down out of principle. But it's the right one. It's the choice of a leader, not just a fighter." The papers were signed the next day. It was over. Just like that. No grand victory, no public apology, just a quiet transfer of funds and a legal document that ensured the farm was mine forever. I walked out of that building into the sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. I had faced the monster that had haunted my family, and I had won. The farm was safe. My mother's sacrifice had not been in vain. Months have passed since that day. Life has settled into a new rhythm, one of peace and hard work. The settlement money helped my neighbors get back on their feet, and we established a community trust to protect Havenwood from predatory developers in the future. We are stronger now, united. I spend my days working the land. I've started to clear the overgrown fields, to mend the fences, to bring the farm back to life. Silas, the old farmer, comes over a few times a week to teach me, sharing a lifetime of knowledge about the soil and the seasons. I've planted a small vegetable garden, and I sell the produce at the local market on Saturdays. Maria, from the diner, buys my tomatoes. The farmhouse is no longer a silent, dusty monument to the past. It's a home. It's filled with light and warmth and the smell of baking bread. My new friends gather around the kitchen table, the same table where my mother left her first letter for me. We share meals, we laugh, we plan for the future. I still think about my mother every day. I feel her in the way the sun warms the fields, in the strength of the ancient oak tree, in the solid foundation of the house beneath my feet. I finally understand her choice. She didn't abandon me. She planted me, like a seed, in the harsh soil of the system, trusting that I would one day grow, strong enough to return to the earth she had saved for me. Her love wasn't in her presence, but in her foresight, in her incredible, heartbreaking sacrifice. My inheritance wasn't the land or the money or the house. It was a story of resilience, of love, and of the fierce, quiet courage it takes to protect what matters most. The scars from my years in the system haven't vanished. They are a part of me, a reminder of where I came from. But they no longer define me. They are just the first few chapters of a much longer book. And now I get to write the rest. What I learned on this journey is that home isn't something you are given. It's something you claim. It's something you fight for, you build, you protect. It's the place where your story makes sense. And your story, the one you're living right now, isn't written by the circumstances of your birth or the systems that may have failed you. It's written in the choices you make every single day. The choice to be brave, the choice to connect, the choice to build something better on the foundations of a difficult past. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to fight to find your own place in the world, then I hope you'll subscribe and become a part of this community. Share a piece of your story in the comments below. Tell us about the home you've built, or the one you're still fighting for. This is a place for people who know what it means to build a life from the ground up, sometimes from the ruins of what came before. You are not alone in that struggle. We're here, and we're listening.